Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with James Lancaster, Managing Director of Alderney Electricity, and we are going to discuss the current, no pun intended, situation on Alderney with regard to energy. And James will also give us an update on the Alderney Energy Plan. As ever, good to see you.
Hello, Tony. Good to see you. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
morning.
Didn't that 3 months go quickly?
I know, it just flies by, doesn't it?
It's
It does.
scary.
It feels like we, I come back thinking, crikey, we only had a chat like
Yeah.
2 or 3 weeks ago. What are we going to talk about this time?
Well, the thing is
I look up and think, okay.
Yeah. The thing is that as we're coming into December, we always like to just try and update everyone with what's happening. And I suppose, the first thing to talk about is the current electricity, diesel and kero prices.
Yeah. So last fuel shipment came in a couple of weeks ago now. We caught a little blip of an increase in fuel pricing. So it has added a couple pence to the price of a litre of fuel, and then had a knock-on effect of on the electricity price at the level of about a penny or so, something like that. So nowhere near as significant as the changes we were seeing 18 months ago.
You've done very well.
Sorry?
You've done very well in terms of backing the right boat at the right time without any hedging.
Yeah, no, I would love to say it was
skill.
It was down to management, but I have to say it's pure luck. But what we've already seen is that little blip is past, and the fuel prices are coming back to probably where they were in July of this year. And we would expect that to carry through to the next boat in January. So we're not going into this winter with anything like the level of concern that we went into last winter. So I think everybody can be reassured by that.
Well, that's good news. Looking through the Brent crude prices, they're sort of hovering in the early $80 a barrel, and JP Morgan are predicting 83 average in 2024. So if that came off, that'd be good from a stability point of view, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we are looking. We're not. It's not as low as it has been, but it's a long way short of the 120, 130 dollars, $150 in the past that we've seen here. So I think overall we can look to at least stable energy prices. All these things come with the usual caveat, unless something else happens that affects it all in this interesting world in which we live. But at the moment, we're looking forward to relatively stable energy prices through 2024.
The thing is, of course, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? You've got the price of oil on the one hand and the pound-dollar relationship on the other.
Yep.
That seems to have stabilized as well, doesn't it?
At the moment, as far as I can see, the currency rates are reasonably stable. I guess it's, to some extent, after the initial shock, you see these perturbations, whether it's in the oil market, whether it's in currency markets or otherwise, and then they settle down and they establish around a new norm, and that's what we've seen, really. So obviously we had the kick that we saw in fuel prices was affected by the immediate crisis in the Middle East, particularly sort of the Palestine-Israel situation. And the markets have sort of absorbed that shock, and so things are starting to normalize again. It's amazing, actually quite amazing how quickly markets will normalize.
Thing is, of course, OPEC have always held the trump card, haven't they, on these matters, and they just cut production a bit, and of course that has an effect on the price.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. What do you think their intention is, to try and get a stable higher price, or just to be awkward?
I mean, they are. Sorry, that's my computer. That's my printer making noises in the background. I'll just switch that off. Do you know what? Smarter people than me don't seem to have an answer to that question particularly.
Yeah.
I would like to think it is purely market dynamics. And so they will look at, like any corporation, they will look at situations in their market and the extent to which they will ride the upside of that situation, of the situation in which they find themselves.
Yeah.
So you can see that when there is an oil shortage, as we saw, as supplies of fuels coming out of Russia stalled, then you look at it and think, well, why would OPEC be looking to reduce production at this time when surely they can now sort of expand into that market? And I guess they're looking at it and saying, well, we've run our numbers, and actually we're better off taking supernormal profits by restricting supplies. Or, conversely, you look at it and say, well, actually, it's not just the economics of it. There is a political agenda here. I don't know. Like I said, smarter people than me scratch their heads on this and still don't have a clue.
Yeah. I mean, the UK government, for example, are talking about granting more licenses in the North Sea. That's great. I mean, theoretically, that's great. But actually, the people that extract are not necessarily going to push that oil back to the UK. It's going to go on the world market. So it's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah. For a long time with North Sea oil, the UK was a net exporter of oil products, but I think we've always been a net importer of diesel. And the middle fractions, which is the things that we are reliant upon on Alderney, diesel for energy production, kerosene for heating primarily. So we're talking about the actions of massive corporations active in global markets.
Very much so. Let's get back to home and talk about the Alderney Electricity standing charges. You've been trying to get this reform for a while, and we've talked about it virtually every time we've met on Zoom. Any news there?
We are making some progress. I mean, at the moment, there is nothing in the background that is particularly accelerating this agenda. So we are not, we're not looking at any particular conditions in the market that say we absolutely have to find a way to reform tariffs immediately. This is more about looking at what the tariff, how we restructure the tariffs. In light of what we believe energy transition looks like as we try to migrate from our reliance upon fossil fuels to more renewable, greener forms of energy. And the big question is still one that, in principle, we know what we want to do. In practice, the dialogue between states and AEL, which we've been going backwards and forwards with for probably, 6-9 months since the energy policy was released and we started to get our heads around it. And we know what we want to do, but what is the fairest mechanism to employ to do that? In the background, there has also been a lot of activity, and I know we'll come on to the discussions of AEL proposals for the introduction of renewable energy and a little bit later in this conversation. But we are only a small company. And so there is a lot of stuff on the table at the moment, and so we're just having to prioritize. So our priority has been towards looking at, we were tasked by the states to look at the potential for introducing renewables into the mix, how much and how quickly we could do it. And that has had to be the priority, really.
Yeah, okay. But in terms of standing charges, can AEL do it unilaterally if you decide to reform it, or does it have to go through the states? And is it subject to secondary legislation?
It's subject to legislation. So at one level, there is nothing to stop AEL introducing new tariff structures. However, one of the things that we have been scratching our head over is the extent to which the existing concession law actually restricts our ability to completely reform that tariff structure, or whether certain structures would have to stay in place under the current legislation. My view is the latter. Others are not quite so convinced that it's as black and white as I think it is, but nonetheless, it has created this debate. And if we can't reform the whole lot, then it defeats the object, rather.
And just to remind everyone that's watching, Alderney Electricity is the principal shareholder are the states of Alderney, our government,
Yes.
and they
Yeah.
hold what, 85%, something like that.
No, just short of 80% at the moment.
Yeah. So I mean,
78%, something like that.
you could say they are the controlling shareholder.
They absolutely are. There are no minority shareholders that have a material stake in the business. So any decisions which require or shareholder approval, or any decisions that the shareholders wish to impose upon the company through, either through the extraordinary general meeting process or through annual general meetings, will by default be driven by the states.
Yeah. I mean, do you think you've got the politicians on side in terms of tariff reform?
Yeah, and the principle is accepted.
Okay.
So the principle that we've always operated under is one where we say, well, the company going forward, AEL, needs to become agnostic about who is generating electricity.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean that whoever ultimately is generating electricity, it should not have an impact upon the community, upon energy prices, either across the community as a whole or for particular sectors of the community. So that almost, if you like, because our customers are always going to be our customers, but it may be that we end up buying electricity from other sources.
Yeah.
And under those circumstances, the company needs to be able to insulate the consumers from any vagaries that might arise, because we have a clash between the existing tariff structures and the contractual situation that we find ourselves in. I'm trying to explain it in simple terms. Obviously, when you get stuck into it, it all gets a little bit more complicated than that. But that's fundamentally what it's about. It's making sure that the community, whether as a whole or, as I say, individual sectors, are protected from any change on the supply side.
Yeah. And of course, the community, we're the stakeholders, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the states of Alderney just represent us rather, Yeah, so there we are.
Yeah, it is worth emphasising that, because it's very easy for us to slip into this one, the states do this, the states do that dialogue. But the states are there to represent the community. And so in that sense, whilst the states of Alderney are the only material shareholder in AEL's ownership structure, actually that ownership is held on proxy for the community.
Yeah. Now, James, coming into winter months, obviously quite a few people are going to be a bit concerned about their ability to pay. Hardship schemes, I know you've always said, always approach AEL personally, still the case.
Yeah, no, it's exactly the same case. If there are any cases of if people are struggling to pay their bills or otherwise, talk to the ladies in the office. If we know about the situation in advance, then it's much easier to deal with. It's much easier to put payment plans in to give people assistance over a difficult period until things improve. There is support available through the states. I believe that will be in place this year as well, to provide support to those people who are genuine cases of energy poverty and suffering hardship.
Yeah.
So, but the thing to do with all of these things is, I feel very, very sorry for people who find themselves in this situation, because you will find yourself massively conflicted by the emotions that triggers, and pride is one of them.
Yes.
And so, but you have to say, look, actually, the sensible thing to hear is just stick your hand up and say, look, I've got a problem here. Can you help me with it? Because 9 times out of 10, if there is such a situation, we can do something to help.
Yeah. And of course, it's confidential between you and the customer, isn't it?
Totally. It never goes beyond the office.
Yeah. That's interesting to know. Now, ways to reduce bills: loft insulation, double glazing, cavity wall insulation. They all put a bit in, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. The cheapest, most effective way of reducing your energy bills is to make sure your house is properly insulated.
Yeah. Yeah. And
end of, really. You can do all sorts of other things, but they tend to be rather more grandiose. They tend to have less overall impact. And things like loft insulation are relatively cheap in the context of things. So for a few £100 you can make a huge difference. And then it pays for itself, very, very quickly.
It does work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, looking at it at this question of reduction of bills and things like that, you're still going to say to me, aren't you, that oil central heating is the cheapest form of heating that we've got on the
island? Yeah, it is. I mean, that remains the case.
Yeah.
I think we are, when we get through the reform piece, then you will start to see parity emerging between kerosene heating and some of the advanced electrical forms of heating your property, heat pumps and all the other things. But it is worth bearing in mind that, as we have said before, Tony, that not all properties are suitable for advanced electrical heating.
Yeah.
You need hyperventilated properties. You need thermally efficient properties, so you're not wasting any of that heat that you generated, because advanced electrical heating, through whatever form, is actually subtle by comparison to kerosene, and therefore you have to maintain the temperature of the building over an extended period of time. You can't just flick the boost on for half an hour to give yourself that additional warmth that gets you through the evening before you go to bed.
And some of the older properties, as you're implying, because of the fact they're made of stone and stuff like that, don't retain heat, do they? As such,
not well enough. I mean, some of the older properties with thick walls actually are reasonably thermally efficient at that level. But you also look at leaky wooden sash windows, single glazed panes of glass. Most of the heat that a building will lose tends to be either through the windows or through the roof. Obviously a massively sweeping statement, but that's where we are. So if you're in a position where you can double glaze your windows, if you're in a position that you can pack your loft full of insulation, then that's going to deal with
a good start. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, you've gone into weather stations. So, I mean, are we going to see you on the 6 o'clock news with the weather forecast?
Yeah, the weather brought to you by Carol at AEL.
Absolutely.
And I'd love that. Now, the weather stations were put up around the island as part of the renewables project, an early stage of the renewables project, because if we are actually capturing data on wind speed, solar irradiation, cloud cover, things like that at various points around the island in real time, then we're able to model the performance of different renewable energy systems, whether that be wind turbines, whether that be solar arrays or otherwise. And so at the moment, what we're doing is running a series of models in the background, or actually developing a series of models in the background still, really, but already starting to see some quite interesting information coming out of those, which show how the different scenarios that we are proposing would be performing. And I hope that actually, as part of that, the public consultation process that we have spoken about in recent weeks, that we will be able to release some of these models into the public domain as part of that consultation, because then people will be able to look at it and say, oh, okay, I see what you mean. Last week we delivered half of the island's electricity from renewables. The week before we didn't, but overall the average is looking exactly as you said it would do. And then we can flex those models and actually show the impact of changes we might make to the proposals. And hopefully that helps to justify why our starting point is to say, look, actually this is the best we can do.
James, have you got a full year of data yet?
Well, in some areas, so we've got full years of data from the performance data. We've got full years of historic data on solar. Actually, got full years of historic data on wind, but not from the specific locations and not with the frequency that we're generating at the moment. I mean, at the moment we're collecting data every few seconds or so.
Yeah.
So it is, in that sense, it's a real-time data set so that we can actually see exactly how some of these things are performing. The other thing that we're testing in this is, of course, we're not looking at just wind or solar. We're looking at an entire system that includes, in the first iteration under our proposals, would include wind, would include solar, would include some energy storage, and would include the diesel. And we can see exactly how those systems are performing together and test whether or not whether the system is actually able to cope with the fluctuations it's seeing, particularly in that input from wind and solar, because the sun goes behind the clouds and the wind gusts.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So this conveniently brings us on to Alderney energy policy. AEL 3 times 3. So
3 by 3, yeah.
I think I've sorted out the 3. So can we start with the solar site selection? That's a good bit of alliteration, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're talking in terms of 2,000 panels?
Yeah, it's the first iteration, we're talking a couple acres of ground to put down 1 megawatt of enough solar panels to produce 1 megawatt of power at peak. So they would generate about 1 million units of energy across the year, possibly a bit higher than that. But I think 1 million units is a comfortable estimate from that array. We currently use about 6. So as you can see, that's upwards of 15% of the island's energy supply. So that's half of what we need. Our peak consumption is in the daytime. It's very rare. It's actually quite rare that panels are operating at their maximum efficiency and their maximum output. So if you average that across the year with the storage that we're looking at, we would expect to use virtually all the power from that array. So that gets us halfway through to our 30% target. 33%.
Yeah. What's the intention? To purchase the land or lease the land?
It's in discussion at the moment. My preference would be to purchase the land. It's just cleaner that way.
Yeah.
It's cleaner that way with long-term leases, but that's something that's in discussion at the moment. We haven't even gone into planning with this, so we have reached a point with the landowners in question that they are supportive of the proposals that we want, and we've got a number of options on the table that they that we're all happy to consider as we go forward.
James, excluding the cost of the land itself, how much are the panels likely to cost?
It's about, we're looking at budgetary estimates of about £1 million per megawatt capacity.
Okay.
So in that first iteration, we're looking at a solar array that's going to cost about £1 million.
And the lifespan, 20 years?
20 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There is some degradation over that period of time, and you do end up replacing panels because some do get damaged, broken, or fail, or otherwise. But yeah, we're talking about a 20-year lifespan for the majority of that array. With some replacement in it, you easily get 20 years out of it.
Now let's get on to the wind. That's another third. And once again, I believe you're talking in terms probably of Fort Albert as the site. Yeah. Is that okay as far as the flight path is concerned?
Yeah, we've spoken to.
I'm sure you have. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Just that was fairly in both, whether it's wind or whether it's solar. That one of the first things in our consideration was whether there was any impact on aviation, because that would be the overriding factor. If there was a significant impact on aviation safety, then the projects wouldn't be able to go ahead.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing we considered. And in the case of the solar, we've done the necessary glint and glare studies, and the feedback that we've had from Guernsey Airport, Ports of Guernsey, who run the airport for us, is that they are happy with the with those first studies. They're not causing them a significant issue. They don't believe there's a significant issue arising from that. In terms of the wind turbines that we're suggesting, you're talking about a structure that stands just short of 60 meters tall on top of a fort with an elevation of about 60 meters. So that takes you up to about 120 meters. Now that's the elevation of the airport. So even at blade's tip height, it's actually only at the level of the airport. So it doesn't present any kind of aviation navigation issues whatsoever.
Can you get 3 in there?
Yeah, you can. The it's not perfect. It's a bit of a squeeze. You get a bit of interference when they're that close together, but it's it's a convenient location. We are looking at 3 turbines which are of a particular design, a particular type that we can manage entirely and maintain entirely with the facilities that we have on island.
Yeah.
So if you go for freestanding wind turbines, which are the majority of things that you see around the UK, for example, or other places when you drive around, whether you go through France, we would struggle to support those because we do not have the infrastructure. We don't have the cranes to be able to actually erect such a mast.
Yeah.
Nor do we have the cranes to be able to actually remove components or drop them down. Should there be an issue, or should we need to maintain or replace at that level? And one of the things that I think we've all learned is if you're going to do something on an island, which is by definition a remote site, then you need to be able to deal with it locally.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is 3 turbines which actually sit on a hinged base. So the base itself is only about less than 3 feet square. It's just a steel base with a pivot built into it that then bolts down to the underlying structure with 4 bolts, one in each corner. The mast itself has a pivot at the bottom, so it lies flat on the ground. You assemble it all flat, and then you simply winch it up into position. And the ones we're looking at are held up by guy lines.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, the advantage of doing that is, firstly, you end up with a much more slender mast and a much lighter structure. So the visual impact is much less because they are much thinner. They're slender. They look more. I'm loath to use the word elegant, but there is, because I know that the visual impact is an emotive one, and some people like them, some people don't, and that needs to be sorted through. Some people like the location, some people don't. But we have deliberately looked for turbines which are as minimally intrusive as they can be.
Yeah. And what about likely cost on that element?
Well, actually, because we're not looking at brand new turbines. So again, people will be concerned about how you recycle the plastic products and wind turbines, things like that. Well, we're not looking at new, so we're not making the recycling problem any worse. So that's at least a start. The total install cost, including connecting into the grid, less than $1 million.
So we're basically on 2 million for the combined solar and
2 million for the combined solar
and wind.
Now, if you look at the amount of and we're talking, as I say, 16-17% of the electricity supply from both of those sources. If you then run the numbers in terms of how many units that means against a capital cost of £2 million, and let's say 10% annual maintenance cost associated with that, it brings the price per unit down to under 10 pence.
And you're not having to run a diesel engine for that particular element.
Yeah, totally. We would be saving 500,000 litres of diesel per annum, from those renewable sources. So again, to put that into a context that everybody can understand, current price to generate a unit of electricity with diesel on island is 25 pence.
Okay.
So we are making a 15 pence saving. So over 50% saving for every unit of electricity that we would generate from these renewable sources. And so if people ask, well, who's going to pay for this? Well, the answer is you are.
Yeah.
But you're not going to see a rise in your electricity bills, because actually what we're doing is we're paying for all of this out of the savings that we make.
Okay. So, yeah, it comes out of the current pot, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Going on to the battery side of it, I know that you've got hopes to have a battery system for backup. The only question I wanted to ask you on that one basically was if you've got a fully charged battery of that size and you're not actually putting any demand on it, does it hold its charge indefinitely, or does it gradually lose a bit of power?
I mean, over a period of time, you would get some degradation, but
Yeah.
there is no intention in this instance to store power for any length of time.
Mm.
So under the proposals that we've got, the simplest way of thinking about it is the island becomes battery powered.
Yeah.
And you are using the actual generation sources simply to charge the battery.
Yeah.
So the battery is permanently charging and uncharging, it's permanently cycling.
Yeah.
And so under those conditions, actually the cycle efficiency is very high.
Okay, that's interesting. Cost on that one?
The battery costs are interesting because originally we were thinking, well, we're probably going to have to go down lithium ion storage system with this, but there are all sorts of issues with lithium ion batteries that we need to think through in terms of health, safety, performance, etc., etc. So that would need to be ironed out. That would have come in again at about the £1 million mark.
Yeah. Okay. So we're up to three.
So
we're up to three.
So we're in big chunks of three now. More recently, we've been looking at alternatives, particularly we're looking at the redox flow batteries, so vanadium flow batteries, which have a higher capital cost, so about 50% higher, but they have a much longer life. So they can certainly do your 20 years, but actually vanadium flow systems, there's no reason that they wouldn't keep running for 25, 30 years with no significant degradation in performance. There are no safety issues. There are no heat issues with those kinds of batteries in the same way that you potentially have with lithium ion. Lithium ion, because the cycle, the way that you are using them, the fact that you can't, it's not sensible to discharge them fully. It's not sensible to keep charging them fully. Actually, better to operate in an intermediate zone. At the moment, what's the life of those? 10, 15 years maybe. Potentially generates issues with warranties on such devices.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is something that will give us at least a third of the life, probably half as much again.
Mm-hmm.
One of the issues that we've got, though, is that the ratio of capacity to output is restricted in vanadium flow. So with the vanadium flow batteries, you are looking at a 3-hour output. So for the kind of systems that we would be looking at, we are looking in the first instance for something that would be able to hold the whole island, so the ability to knock out 1.1 1.2 megawatts. So you are looking at 3.6 megawatts of 3.6 3 hours of capacity, so that's 3.6 megawatt hours of capacity at peak.
Yeah.
And you're now looking at a cost that is upwards of 2 million.
Yeah.
So you end up with a big chunk of money going into storage. However, the benefits that you get are quite significant for that increase in cost. And suddenly we find ourselves with a battery that actually can store all of the overnight power that we need. And by increasing the battery to that size, you also increase the amount or reduce the amount of power that you are spilling from your renewable sources. So we haven't yet modeled what the impact would be on the total amount of power that we could expect to get from a system with this larger battery in place. But it will have a knock-on effect in terms of the amount of diesel that we're using and the amount of actual renewable power and the size of the arrays, whether wind or solar, that we can actually take onto the island now.
Okay.
So
now,
overall, there's a benefit attached to it. So we are looking at a price tag for the whole of this system, probably pushing up towards 5 million by the time everything's installed and connected onto the grid, something like that.
Yeah. Now, you made the point that from the consumer's point of view, it shouldn't have too much of an impact because of it's all within the AEL money pot. But by the same token, you're going to have to borrow money to fund these things. So do you borrow or do you lease?
So lease schemes are few and far between. If we're looking at, well, depends what you mean by lease. So if our starting point is that we actually wish to minimize the cost, then one of the things that we need to do is look at economic leakage. So as soon as you bring somebody else into the equation, you are having to pay for their profits as well. So it is better at one level economically if we can own and operate all of the systems. £5 million would be a stretch for AEL's resources. We would certainly have to look at the funding for obviously the grid connection for all these devices and for the storage, because the amount of power, there is no business case that stands up to justify the cost of the batteries alone. So the cost of the batteries or the benefits there relate to benefits that we get from integration across the network. So the resources which AEL have available do need to be focused on those elements of the system where there is less of a less secure investment case.
Yeah.
In the case of wind and solar, actually, there's got a secure investment case. So my preference would be to fund it initially, check that everything's working properly, and then effectively sell those systems on. And in an ideal world, I'd sell them back to the community.
Yeah. Okay,
because the model there is that the community effectively buy them for us, and then AEL buy the power from the community at a rate that would be at least equivalent to the money you're getting on your savings account or whatever.
And you could sort of use the fact that the states own the grid as an example of how that side of it would work.
Yeah. I mean, what we're talking about is giving everybody on the island an opportunity to invest and make a return. So invest in the future of the island, the energy future of the island, but also make a sensible return on that investment.
Yes, and people will take that up, I'm sure.
Yeah, I would hope so, because I would hope that we will be in a position to actually offer favourable terms under those circumstances. And I mean, think of it in real terms. If it's costing, if you think the capital cost is £1 million for the solar array, and you're getting 1 million units a year, then you're talking a 10-year payback on that at a 10% return.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the way to do it. I think if you pitch it at the right level, you'll get people coming in on it, no doubt. Now, I'm sorry to have to say, Mr. Zoom is saying that we've only got 1 minute 30 left. So
okay.
I think
what's the most burning question, Tony?
I think we've really covered most of the things that I wanted to cover today. So many thanks as ever, and we'll have another go, next year to get an update.
There's more coming into the public domain about all these different proposals over the next couple of months or so, culminating in a public consultation event, which will stretch over a period of days, giving everybody in the community the chance to ask all the questions and get all their questions answered, so that they can fully understand the proposals that are being put in front of them. I am looking at the end of January, possibly early February for that, when we brought everything else together. So it would be good to catch up around then, and we can trail into that.
I shall look forward to that. Meantime, happy Christmas, happy New Year.
Thanks very much, and you.
And as ever, many thanks for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. So thanks, James.
Welcome as always.